Hi everyone. So due to popular demand, we're going to be doing simple auth again, and this time using an actual database. So we're going to start with absolutely nothing, which is empty folder, and we're going to work our way towards authentication. So first thing to do is initialize the project. So let's start with like a few features. So like as I should be able to sign up. Actually, even before that, I should be able to go to the /route and see the dashboard page. Right, so that's the initial bare bones feature. And then I'm going to add an ability for person to sign up. So I should be able to sign up by going to the sign up page. And I should be able to log in. So these are the major specs, and each of these could be broken down into more detailed steps as we go through each of them. Right. So, so the first thing I would need is that I would need an express. So I need to add express to my server. And so in order to okay, let's do the first one. So that's the most simple thing, which is, adding express to my server. So I'm going to create, I'm going to create a directory called source. And I'm going to create a directory, or actually I'm going to create a file called server.js. And this file is going to be pretty simple. Require express and wait, is this how you call express? I forget. Look at express.js doc.
And you can also just put
Gotcha. So you can directly just say
app
is express. All right. So do that, and I want to start the app on support. I think app.listen. So app.listen. Let's just use 2000 for now. And I want to create a route / which renders the dashboard page. The response starts send. This is the dashboard. Right, and I will need to add something to my package.json to be able to start my project. So start dev. And I need to install it on so.
Is there a difference between capital S and little s? For save?
This one?
Yeah.
It's a good question. Let's see. Not sure. So Mac. Doesn't really talk about flags here. Maybe not. Both seem to work. All right. So we have a server going. Localhost 3000. I get this. So we have something going, right? So going back to our README. So actually, when I do READMEs, I like to convert these into like checklists. So I know what's happening. So I can mark this as complete. Okay, so if I need to go to the sign up page, there's different things that need to happen, right? I need a schema which contains the users table, right? And then within that, columns should be its username and this password for now. Not even going to encrypt it. Plain text. And we need a page to render the sign up form. So this is the get route. And then I need a post route to insert user into the team. Okay, so right now we just have a server file. I'm going to create models, DB folder. So now we have models DB, and then I'm going to create schema.sql.
And -p is for path, for that flag.
So dash p is like if the directory doesn't exist, it's going to create, it can create nested directories. Because otherwise I had to first create models and then create DB because models didn't exist. But -p that creates like recursively nested directories. Hey, you can check this if you do man. So -p here. Oops. It says that it creates an intermediary directories as required. So yeah, you can look it up. Okay, so now I need a schema, right? So let's go and create the schema. So it's going to be super simple. So phase 1 is not going to have any encryption. Phase 2, we're going to add encryption to it. So create table users. It has username. It has ID. Serial. Primary key. And the username is varchar. Maybe personal email. 255 and password is right. So this is the absolute bare bones.
Do you want the table names to be singular or plural?
Usually, yeah, I actually prefer singular, but the user is a reserved keyword, so we'll have to call it something else. Remember. Okay, so once we have this, so we have this done. So we'll need a folder for our routes. So routes, And let's create a file for users. So I'm going to say touch routes users.js. And actually, before that, I need to create a file for my database functions. So I need a file in my models, users.js, as well as so I'm going to essentially need to create the query functions for each of my functions that I decide. So in this case, the only action that I can do right now is sign up, right? So the action corresponds to creating a user. So I need to have a create function, but I also need like a pgpromise to make that happen. So I need to install pgpromise. So while that happens, models. So I'm creating a file called con.js, which is essentially the connection. So I'm going to say const bgp equal to require pgpromise. Let's look at the documentation. Require pgpromise, and then db is the connection. So const db equal to p of so what's the app simple of, right? Development using this name. Host. So connection object takes in host port database, I see. Database. Okay. And then module.exports equal to db. All right, so now in my users table, I'm going to require so I have the connection. Actually, con is fine within the DB folder. Okay, so we have the connection, and now we need a function to create a user. So I'm going to say const create equal to function. And this essentially takes in email and password. Right, and I say connection dot query insert into user member email and password values. Okay. Cool. So I return this. module.exports. So I return this function. Right, so now I have a way to create a user, and I'm going to have this file here, which is my models file, and I'm going to require, oh, actually I call it member, right? Damn it.
Yeah, you called it.
Okay, bear with me for now. I'll rename the files. So I'm saying say const db equal to require db/users, and then module.exports okay. Cool. Now that we have that, let's try to create something. So let us go into our users file. I'm just going to say create with let's see what happens. So node models db users. Unhandled simple auth development doesn't exist. Nice. So try to run the query, and then it complained about how the database doesn't exist because we haven't created the database. So in our package.json, we need a script to create the DB. So let's say DB create would be create DB and then DB init would be npm run DB create simple D. So I want to choose the simple auth development database and then give it a file which is source models db schema.simple. All right, so let's see if that works. So npm run db init. Okay, so that worked. Now if I run this thing, something is happening. Let's check our post echo. Actually, let's not check post echo. Let's just do this simple development. Okay, so it put stuff in there. So this function seems to be working, right? Okay, so now we have a way to insert a user into the database. So going back to our README, so I guess we had to write a function to insert a row member table. So we did that. So now we need a page to render the sign up form. So we need to go to routes, users, and we need a router. So equal to require express.router, and then it's a router.get sign up. We give it a function request response. So here we want to render the form, which will allow a user to sign up. So we need some sort of a templating engine. At this point, we don't have that, right? So right now I'm just going to render some fake response, which is so now when I go here /sign up, cannot get it because I haven't mounted this. So I'm going to create a file called index.js inside my routes folder, and this is going to import all the routes. So const members require actually, you know what? I'm just going to rename the files. Okay, so
oh yeah, small, but yeah, and then you also have this, which is awesome. Will you tell me about it actually, though? Yeah.
okay, so this is our router for members, but we also need a router which sort of combines everything. So the index file is usually that file which combines all the different routers that exist. So I'm going to require my members route, and I'm going to mount this. So I'm going to say, and I need to create another router here. So router is require express start router, and then I need to mount use with members. And then in my members, I need to module exports this router. And then here I need to require routes. Is require routes, and let's say app.use. And I can potentially make this here to right. So now I just have this one line in my server.js which mounts all of my routes. So if tomorrow I need to add more routes to my system, I just modify this file. Right. So if I have router.use blogs, I just do that tomorrow. Then I need to add more routes to my system. Cool. So once I have that, I can potentially go up to the sign up page, and then it renders there should be a sign up form. So let's change that. So instead of rendering the string, I want to render an actual, EJS or a Pug template. So which means I need a templating library, which means I need to modify my server.js to know that it needs a templating library. So I need to say app. I'll just forget the things. I think it's app.set, and then we need to set some sort of view engine. View engine is .js. And then I need to install JS. So express set view engine. Right, so view engine, and then also need to set the path, right? How do we set the? Here you go. Apps.set views. Okay. App.set views is dir name plus. So we are right now in the source directory. We need the views directory, but we don't have a views directory, right? So I need to create a views directory. And I'm also going to create views/members. So my members page, so sign up page is essentially rendering the new page for my members, right? It's like a new page to add a new member. So I need to ensure that I have members new.ejs. Here I would have a form. With the action set to /signup, method equal to post, and input field name equal to email, type is what?
Text.
Text, yes. Okay, and then I'd have some sort of a label to say email. This would be like some sort of paragraph. And then I do the same thing for the password. And then I need to have a submit button.
Yeah, isn't it like input
Is it input
type
and
equals
then-
submit?
Yeah.
I think submit also exists though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can also do input type equal to exist. But let's try this. Okay, so let's try to render the page. Okay, so there's something to do with button submit.
Yeah. It's either going to be button or it's going to be input type submit.
If you submit, I think it has to be in a form.
It is in a form.
Like in a form tag.
Yeah.
It is in a form tag.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Type equal to submit. I guess you can just do that. Or the submit button. Okay.
Well, input is a self-closing tag.
So what would be the name or value, I'd say?
I mean, I believe you can have that say button.
My friend?
As long as I believe you can have when you have input type submitted, you can have that say button as long as it has type submit.
Or if it's a button?
Like inside of a button tag, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are 2 ways.
Cool. So,
Yeah, so it helps if you also draw.
okay. So when I submit this form, it doesn't really do anything because I don't have that route set up yet. Right? So I need a post route here.
Then the second thing that is
And then I'm just gonna console.log body params. So request to body and response.render. Let's do send submitted. So I sign up. I get that, and I don't have anything in my body params because I'm not doing anything with the body params. So I need like body parser here. So what is that? npm install, and then I need to add that to the server. So I'm gonna say use body parser dot something. Body parser, and then we want to use the form URL encoded thing for body parser.
So like there's always the which is like in the future filter thing.
URL encoded. And what does extended mean? So this object will contain key value pairs and the value can be string, blah, blah, blah. String or extended is false, or anytime when extended is true. Okay, so let's do extended true.
Actually, have something Aaron, will you like see?
I think you have to set it. I don't think you should. The default.
Like a little bit like checking
Okay, so now we're getting some stuff back. Cool. So now we have the body params. We now need to send the request down to our create function in our database. So we need to require our model. And then I'm going to say members.create. So the way we wrote the create function was that we have, it expects a username and password, or email and password, right? Probably be nicer if it just expects a user, a member, and then you can just like pass it. You can just pass it. Oops. We can, instead of passing in an array here, we can just pass in the object itself. Right, because that's kind of what we have here anyway. Our request.body is an object. Right, so when we logged our request.body, we got back an object. And the object was something like this. So we can pass along that object directly and then just like destructure. So this is like what's happening here is PG Promise's own own destructuring. This has nothing to do with like template literals and string interpolation. This is essentially saying that extract email from the object that you pass it. So in the first case, we were using positional parameters, right? We were using $1, $2, if you remember. And this would work if the parameter that we are passing into our query, the second parameter, is an array. And then it looks up the first element from the array and the second element from the array. That's what 1 and 2 signify. But if I happen to pass an object, there's no way for it to look up the first element of the object because that doesn't make sense, right? You have to look up objects. You can only look up things by the key. So you have to specify what the key is. So here you're specifying the key is email, like its own syntax, and here you're specifying the key is password. So if these two keys don't exist, it's not going to work, right? So if I have a typo here, if I thought that, oh, it was a username, it's not going to work because it's going to try to extract username from this object here, and we know that that username doesn't exist because the object only has email and password. So this is a nicer way to indicate what exactly the values are. Okay.
So what documentation where would I find that? And I can look at myself.
Yeah, so I think it's called common pitfalls or mistakes.
Oh yeah, that's the one you mentioned last week. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There should be a pitfall video game. PG promise pitfalls.
I can send this in the chat. So this is essentially a redundant name parameter. Actually, no. Yeah, I guess it's this. Yeah, this name parameter. So how do I? Yeah. Oops. Okay. Right. So now I can essentially say once member equal to request dot body, and I can say member and dot then I get back member. Dot catch, I get back an error. And the next catch block, I just pass along the error to my next middleware. All right, so what happens when we successfully create a user? We want to redirect to the dashboard page. Maybe that's a good thing to do. Or we want to redirect to the login page, right? So depending on what we want to do, so let's do that. So let's redirect to the login page. So response at redirect / login. Right, so something is wrong. Cannot find modules numbers. Okay, so it's /. Yeah. So if I say Austin hours,
Do we have a login page?
we do not have a login page. So all right, so we got the user saved into a DB, but notice that the password is in plain text there, so that doesn't seem pretty nice. So let's change the password field to be a password field. So it's not text, it's just password.
Don't you also use a method post?
Yeah, there's a method equal to post.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, so the password is not hidden, so that's nice.
I'm curious why you use the label tag or like email and password. Could you have just typed in plain text password?
Yeah, it's just a good practice. So whenever you have a form, so some libraries, for example, look up the label and find the corresponding matching text field. So like to do like validation, to show validation errors. So it's always a good practice to have a label for your label. And yeah. that make sense? So the question was, why do I have a label and not just the actual text? So labels are sometimes useful. It's like good practice to wrap your elements, and you're giving them identifiers saying that this is the label. So it can easily go through your form and find the different labels. So if you have validation errors, it can automatically, generate nice messages when something bad happens. To say your label, something was wrong with this label. Things like that. Okay. So we created a user and redirected to. So notice that I had a. I can actually create a user with the same email. Right, so now it has two users with Austin Powers in there. Okay, so we don't have a login page. So to my thing, I'm gonna add and say should not be able to sign up with the same email. Right, so that's another spec that edge case that I found. So we have routes and members. I want to create a new file called authentication.js just to separate out my routes. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Oops. And I'm going to say router.get/login. All right, so response.render. Right, so it's going to try to render this view. I don't have this file yet. So let's create this file. So right now I only have members. I'm going to create a new directory called authentication. And inside authentication, I'm going to create a file called login.ejs. Okay. So once I have that, I'm going to try to render a similar form that we had in the other file. So instead of signing up, we're going to login. And pretty much the same email and password combination. So I will need a corresponding form for this and post route. And then here I need to do some sort of validation, right? To check the username and password. Okay. Response start send. All right, so let's try to do that flow again. So I sign up. So I sign up with Austin Powers again. So that didn't work. Why? Because I did not mount this to my router. So the index is the file which contains all of my routes. Right, so I need to import this new file that I created. So I created authentication, and I will need to mount it like that. Right, so now I have this mounted too, so that means I can go to a login page, I think.
You're not exporting.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Oops. Okay. So now I can log in. So when I log in, it won't really do anything because I don't have anything. So any ideas on what we need to do here? Right. So I will get the username and password from the form, but then what do I do with the username and password?
Record it in the database, encrypted.
What's that?
Like you said, this version we're not encrypting the password, so it's recorded to the database.
But this is to log in.
To log in, so you query the database for a user that has that username, and then confirm that the password is the same.
Okay, so that means we need a way to query the user or the members table with the email, not even the username, right? So I need a function that I can find a member by email. We don't have that. So I need a function find by email. Oops. This takes an email and it says return query.
I know.
From member where what's up? Okay, and then what? So this is going to give me back. What is this going to give me back?
All the information, the row where that email is equivalent.
So is it going to give me back a single row or a list of rows?
A list if it's multiple emails with that information.
Right, and what do I want?
Just the one.
Okay.
But should we only have one email
To begin with.
in our database?
We should,
Okay.
but
We
that's
should, right.
that's not the reality though.
Yeah.
So in order to make that happen, we may have to modify the schema. That's not what I wanted. So how do we ensure that the email is unique?
As unique, not null.
So adding a unique keyword to this one? How do I add it?
And
What do I say? Unique?
it's not null.
No.
And then not no.
Okay. So you want some not null here too, I
Yeah.
would imagine. Okay. So let's delete.
Can't you just truncate the table?
Yeah, I don't want to truncate it. Okay. Oh wow. 4, 2. Okay, so now we have 2 users.
Should we test that
Test what?
to see if unique not null works?
So if I sign up with the user, it should throw an error.
Well, we didn't reapply the schema, we just changed it.
Good question.
So we
Good
have to
call.
reload.
So we do have to
Yeah.
do a reset.
Or toss, or update the schema.
Yeah, or just like reload it.
What is it called? Init?
You could also just TSQL,
Oh.
update table,
Oh.
do it that way too.
Alright, so DB init isn't quite working because it creates the. I think you can give create DB a flag to only create if there is no DB, right? So can you say man create DB? Username, password.
You could do drop and
Yes. Yeah, we could drop and create it. But then that would assume that the DB exists.
You can also say if it exists. You can say
Yeah.
drop DB if it exists.
Yeah.
So that would be in the SQL, you mean, right?
If
That's
you do,
drop
if
table
you
if
do
it
the command
exists.
for drop and then do a semicolon after it, if it throws an error saying I couldn't drop it, it'll then still execute the create. It won't like stop because the
Yeah, but that's not good because it's going
it's
to
not,
fit.
yeah, it's not.
Uh,
It's that job.
So create DB.
Yeah, I think that's like a.
And there's a flag, I think, for.
Regardless of any situation, it's override everything with that. Truncating is from user into the table, but it doesn't actually change the schema of the table.
Alright, I'm just gonna drop DB. What do they call it?
Simple authorization development. Simple auth development.
What?
Was there DB?
There's no DB, yeah.
Okay, so let's sign up. And then let's log in. So let's say sign up again to see what happens. Okay, so you get an error. But if you try to log in, nothing's going to happen. We haven't implemented it. So going back to our routes. Actually, not authentication. So what we need to do is we need to find a user, right, or find a member. So we need a members. Models members. Right, so we had find by email. So find by email is going to give back a list of rows, but we want only one row. So how do we get back a list of this first row from this? Promise.
So I guess you do a then that grabs, we'll call it emails, and then
That's going to be members.
Members. Okay, so members dot rows 0. The index 0.
Oh, we're not going to have rows. It's just going to directly give us members.
Oh, this gives it one.
So members of 0.
And could you also have used like limit?
Yeah, you can use limit too, but it's still going to give back an array of one row. It always gives you back an array.
Is PG promise support where you can call, maybe instead of query or with query, call one, and it like tells it only give me back one?
Right, so you can, yeah, you're right. So there's a function called db one or none or something.
Okay.
Just like dot one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's also one just called one.
Yeah.
Right, but that'll throw an error if there's no user with that name. We don't want to throw an error. Right? We don't want an error to be thrown if there is no user. If somebody like tries to log in with a user that doesn't exist, we don't want a system to throw an error.
Maybe we do, because we could use that error to say, okay, the user doesn't exist, so we direct them to the sign up page.
No.
But the reason.
Sorry, let's finish this one. So an error is useful when something bad actually happens, like some sort of a failure condition was triggered, but a user signing up or like logging in with an incorrect username is not a failure condition. It just means that, that user didn't exist. So you, instead of throwing an error, you just return that there was no user found, and then, use that, have that conditional logic to then do what you want. Instead of like throwing an error. Because then what is the difference between your database crashing and a user not being found? There's no difference.
I mean, you could look at the specific error message.
Yeah, that's not a good way to go about it. Yeah, errors should be used for legitimate errors.
So
Yeah.
what situations do you throw your own errors?
What situations do you throw errors?
Do you throw your own?
If you're interacting with an external API and it doesn't return what you expected, throw an error.
Okay.
Some sort of mismatch in the contract, right? There was something about some contract which didn't match, or some behavior which you expected and that did not happen. That's when you throw an error. If the user is not found because it doesn't exist in the database, it's not a weird behavior. That's how the database works, right? That's it. So don't throw an error in those cases. Phil, did you have something?
No, I was glad. That's what I was going to mention. That I think when it comes to like an empty username, you just want to say that username not found or something like that, because you don't want to throw the app in a state of an error state because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
That way, it just allows.
And also, errors are expensive to create because you're breaking away from the flow of your path of your promise. Yeah. So especially so JavaScript, I'm not really sure, but most languages it's like super expensive to create errors. So don't create errors unless really needed. Okay. So find by email. So we get the first one out. I think one and none is a thing, so we'll find out. And then we need to export this.
I think if you're using one or none, then you don't have to have that.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. Thank you. And then I'm going to need to do this too. Find by email. Okay, so now here I say members.find by email request dot say email body dot email. So I get back a member. If member dot password not equal to that's the password here. Not equal to password, then I say response dot redirect to the / login page. Actually, and if not member, also I do this. I do the same thing. Something lazy here, but you may want to do this in separate if blocks if you want to specify custom error message in the different cases.
You need an opening bracket on line 14.
Yeah.
Line 14, you have a semicolon with the bracket.
Oh.
Yeah, you're right.
Cool. All right, so if that's the case, then in the else block, that means we've like successfully signed in. So we want to, create a session for the user at this point. Right, and then we want to redirect to the slash page. That's it. So how do we create a session for the user? There's two ways to do it. There's, you can use express session or you can use cookie session. I'm going to go with express session. So express session essentially creates a session for you and saves the session on the server side. And it uses cookies to store the value of the session ID. And then the value of the session ID is sent across in every request. And then that's used to look up the session from the session store. Okay, so we need to install this. So npm install express session.
Did you say that express session both saves the session to a database and puts it on the header to go back out to the client? It does both parts?
It doesn't save it to the database unless you ask it to.
Okay.
But it saves the session on the server side. So it could be in the database, it could be anywhere.
And also puts it on the header of the response.
No, it puts it in a cookie. It puts the session ID in the cookie.
Okay.
Right, so because it's kind of like, think of it as if it's an object, right? If your sessions are if all the sessions in your system is just stored in an object, the key of the object is the session ID and the value is the session itself. So if I want to look up the session, I need to know what the session ID is because that's the key. I can just look up things by the key in an object.
I see, so it's just handling that part, okay.
And I want so the session is essentially the browser, right? It's the user's activity. So the browser needs to know what the session ID is. And the only way the browser can know what the session ID is if the server tells the browser that this is what the session ID is.
Right.
And the only way a server can do that is if it sends the data through like either in a cookie, right? Because that is like the storage on the browser for more than a single request.
Right.
Because it's like persistent storage. And then you can set like expiries and control when the cookie gets expired. And that's useful if you want to expire a session. Or if a user logs out, then it just expires that session. Or expires that cookie, sorry. Okay, so we require express session and then the and we got to use express session. How do we use it? There you go. Okay, so it's going to create a session for us. So let's see when exactly is the session created. So in my network tab, or actually not a network, application tab, I can look at the current cookies on my page, and there's nothing here. How do I zoom in here? Right, there's nothing here. The only time when it creates a session is if I say something like, let's say I had a middleware function, which always creates a session, right? I would say response.cookie, session dot, let's say name equal to gold member. I don't know why I'm thinking of Boston Parts today. Anyway, so that's we sort of created a session here, right? So we have added a value to our session object, and the session object doesn't exist. So when this middleware is triggered, so this is a middleware, right? So this is going to be triggered for every request. So right now it's not there. Let's see what happens. I'm going to refresh this page. Oh, I'm getting a 500. Request for session is undefined. Oh, it's request. Yeah, sorry.
Also, don't you have to call next in that middleware?
Very good, Patrick. I was just testing you. Okay.
I'm gonna have to use that line.
Okay, so it did not create. So the login had a response. Okay. Okay, so that's something isn't happening. Let's look at the documentation. So I expected the session to have been created because of that middleware. So it is recommended to use some HTTPS thing. Key. So request.session. Use the session middleware. Okay. Let me try to refresh the page.
Yeah, but it looks like actually this isn't what I thought it was. This looks like a part of the version. It's not the whole thing like I thought it was.
So I'm setting the session, initializing the session, and I have a middleware that gets executed every time. So let's see. Console.log before request session. All right. So if I refresh the page, before I had just an empty session, and after I had a session. Let's see if I refresh the page again, do I get the same thing? No, so the before creates a new session. Why it no create session? What's going on? So let's say I have a max age set. No, I do not have a max age set. I'm just going to use this.
Yeah, if you didn't have it installed, it would throw an error.
Okay, so I have an expires now. Okay, so maybe that was the reason. So I didn't have the max age property set on my config for express session, and that probably is needed. So let's read what max age does. So max age.
Just setting the expiration of it.
Right. So what happens if you don't set it? So if
I think you just have to give it a cookie thing. Max age is an option that didn't there.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. So there wasn't a cookie option. So no, but there was a cookie option here too. I want my cookie to be secure.
Are you sure?
Nobody gets my cookies. Okay, so the max age specifies the number to use when calculating the expire set cookie attribute. Okay. So how long the cookie is valid for, and then the cookie secure specifies this truthy secure attribute is set. As compliant clients will not send the cookie back to the server. Oh, I see. So this is useful only when you're on an HTTPS domain. So if you're not in an HTTPS domain, it's not going to send the cookie back to you. So you ideally want to be on an HTTPS domain when you're on a sign up page and a sign in page, because you're sending across the password. Remember we spoke about this yesterday?
Yeah.
Where only the body is encrypted. So if we are not using secure HTTPS, then people can sniff the request and just like read your password.
Yeah.
So if only the body is the header part of the body?
No.
No. So if this is, why would this care about HTTPS if it's still going to put the cookie on the header?
The cookie only contains the session ID, but also the cookie is encrypted too, which is why it has the secret. But don't use keyboard cat because everyone uses that. But this is the encryption key that's used to encrypt the cookie. So what is the value of the cookie on the browser. It's this random value.
Right, but I can still sniff that.
Go for
Put
it.
that in my browser and say, oh, here's my encrypted key that my server would then unencrypt and say, oh, I have unique. That's really deep.
Oh, you're saying that you could sniff the cookie and save it to your browser? Oh, yeah. So there's a domain. There's a domain that exists as well.
Okay.
So you can sniff the cookie, but only the browser is not going to let you create the cookie and then add a custom domain to it.
Okay.
So the domain determines which person, who created the cookie, and the server only sends those cookies that were created by the domain.
Okay.
So if you create an exact same cookie called connect.sid with the same value, the browser is not going to send it back to the server because localhost wasn't the one who created the cookie. It was created by you. So for example, if I create a new cookie here, oops, I cleared the cookie.
Well, that's because the express session middleware, you have to check the range.
Wait, so what were we doing? Yeah, so we essentially have a way to set the session, modify the session, and the session persists for as long as it's valid for. Right, so this expires sometime in the future.
So if you don't set the max age, does that mean it just like expires immediately? Is that what was happening?
Well, he also has secure true.
Yeah, I also had secure true,
so
which
that's
was the
what was
problem. Yeah.
okay.
So max age by default is by default no maximum age is set. What does that mean?
Does that just mean it lasts until the browser is closed?
So let's see. So expires. Yeah, so it's just a session cookie. So it's valid forever. Cool.
Did you type in session when it was there, or you just took out max age?
I just took out max age. All right, so we essentially have a way to add stuff to our session. And notice that before I had this thing, but now I will continue to have gold member in there. So even in my before. So I was able to persist that data. Everyone see that? So in the beginning, when I restarted my server, my session was empty. Like it just had like the cookie values. And then I added a field called name to it. But when I came back, the name still exists. That's how I can persist the session beyond a single request. So did everyone see that? Questions about this?
So is that what Passport does? It adds the user information.
Right. So when you call the callback function, I think when you call done of something, yeah, it's essentially, if I remember correctly, yeah, it's adding whatever you pass in as the second argument, it's adding that to the session. And it's available to you as request.user, I think, right? Yeah. Request.user is automatically available to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever you put as the second argument, it automatically. So here I could essentially even do this. Sometimes you have a function like app.use, add user to request, like some sort of a middleware function.
Yeah.
And then here, what this function is essentially going to do, this is probably what Passport is doing under the hood, which is request response next. It's just saying request.user equal to request.session.user, and then just calling next. And that's essentially what we will have to do as well.
Yeah.
Because we're doing everything manually. Okay, so this is kind of to give you a general idea of how sessions work. So now let's go into our route authentication. And now here we actually have to create a session, right? So at this point, we're going to say request.session.use.member equal to member. Actually, I'm going to say user just because the user. And then I'm going to say, that's it. So I'm just going to do this. And I'm going to have a middleware called add user to request that's going to automatically do this every time. So what I actually want is some more organization. So I'm going to create a file called routes middlewares.js. I'm going to move this function into my middlewares function file. Oops. And then here, I'm just going to require middlewares as and then here, I'm just going to say middlewares.add user to request.
Why are we adding request.session.user to request.user then?
Because request.session.user is an implementation detail of where the user is in my request object. I want my user to always be available as top level on my request. So this middleware helps me abstract that out. So everywhere else, wherever I need the user, I always look up request.user. I don't even need to know that it's using a session or like whatever it's doing under the hood. Right, so it's hiding the implementation details from the controller. So in my controller, so actually this is also like an implementation detail, right? So it's more like I need a function called create session, right? And this will live somewhere. So let's just define it here for now. It needs a request. Actually, it doesn't even need that. It just needs session. So again, so like the intention that I want everyone to get out of this is I want to hide details from the controller. The controller doesn't need to know about what a session is, how the session is stored, what are the properties in the session. All it cares about is like something needs to happen. I need to create a session. I don't know what that is. Call the function which does it. And the function is responsible for doing that thing of like, oh, do I want to call it a user or do I want to call it a member? That's a decision that that function does. Right? And similarly, in other parts of my code, so let's say, for example, on the dashboard page, right? So I had routes index. So this is the dashboard. Let's say I want to say, welcome template literals. I would say request.user.email to the right. So the controller just wants to know that there just is like the contract is set with the controller that the request.user is going to be available to you and it's going to have a user object. How it gets in there is not the responsibility of the controller to know. This controller doesn't know how it got in. Somebody downstream put it in there. And somebody downstream is this middleware here. And this middleware knows the implementation details, saying that, oh, it's actually in the session. Right? The user object is available to me in the session. So you're creating these layers of abstraction. So tomorrow, if I decide that I don't want to use express session and I want to use cookie session, and that behaves differently, I only have to change add user to request. And let's say this changes from request.session to request.cookie or something. This would only have to change. Everywhere else, I continue to use request.user, and it just works without me having to worry about what changed. So abstractions are very useful in hiding details. So you can swap things out under the hood and things just work without even me realizing that something changed. Okay, so going back to our code. So here I am checking to see, creating the session, and I'm redirecting to slash. Okay, so let's see if that actually works. So I'm going to say Austin at Middlewares. What was my password? I forgot. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that didn't work. Is it not Austin at powers.com? So something happened. Syntax error. I think it's because of this. It needs to be an array. Right.
Doesn't it need to be $1 too?
No, I think question mark works too.
Oh, it does.
You can give like multiple question marks. Or at least that's the hope. What's that? Why is it still? No, which line is this? Okay, so maybe you need to add some error handling here.
That is a single thing that doesn't actually happen.
Let's try this. Okay. Maybe question mark was not a thing. It's coming from a different language. Okay, so going and refreshing. So have we covered all cases? So let's say a user logs in with an incorrect password. What happens? Okay, so it redirects back to the login page.
So connect SID is coming from express cookie or express session.
Yeah, that's the default name of the cookie. You can change it. Okay, so
The error around 26 and 27 are different.
All right. Cool. I think so. That's pretty much like the basic stuff. Like now, you may want to like add encryption to it, and I think many people know how to do that. So going back to our README.
Do you have to call next in the successful case?
No, because I'm sending back a response. Okay, so we did this, we did this, we did this. So some other features would be,
Just kind of like recovering.
so we did this too actually.
I think I've been,
Passwords should be encrypted. So I would have to change the password column or like rename to encrypted password. Right, so in my schema, I want to change this to encrypted password, just because it's more indicative of what the value of the column is going to have.
Basically, yeah, someone looks up password, they see a giant string.
Right, it's going to be like, what is this? It'll be like, oh, this is a cool password, but it's actually not the password. And then use decrypt to create the encrypted passwords before saving to 30. And then use decrypt to compare user input with the stored encrypted password. Right, so all these steps would probably be familiar to many of you. Yeah, so go ahead and do that. Cool, that's all I had. Does anyone have any questions?
no, but I guess a follow-up is to the authorization at some point for the user roles.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
I noticed when I sat down.